How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Samach, Daf 60 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, Daf 60 is extremely interesting in my opinion. It is, I'd say, 100% Agadita. So I feel like it's been like a year since then. Honestly, I feel like we haven't really had this since like Avodah Zarah or something. It's been ages. So I feels that way. Anyway, so just sit back, enjoy yourselves, and just come along for the ride. I think it should be fun. It should be a nice, enjoyable daf. There is some really, really famous stuff on Daf Samach and Beis. So come join me. Let's enjoy ourselves and learn Daf Samach of Masechta Chullin. Friends, we begin on Daf Nun Tes Omid Beis, about slightly more than halfway through the Omid at the two dots. We had said yesterday that there's an animal called a keresh, and this keresh has but one horn, and it is considered a chaya, and its chelev is mutter. Says the Gemara, Rav Yehuda keresh tavya debei Eloi, that the keresh is the deer from Beit Eloi, which is some kind of, I don't know, maybe magical, mystical forest. I don't know exactly. Tigris Aryeh Dveiloi, and the Tigris is the lion of this forest. Rav Kahana says, Rav Kahana, Teisha Amosa Have Bein Una Leuna the Aryeh Dveiloi. Says Rav Kahana that there are 9 amas. That's like a lot. It's like 15 feet. I don't know. It's quite a bit between the ears of the lion of Beit Eloi. Rav Yosef says, Rav Yosef Shitzer Amhosa Havi Moshche. The Tavid Veila. It says of Yosef that the deer of Beit Eloi was 16 amas long. That's a lot. It's like a lot. It's like a lot. It's like 25 feet. I don't know. It's quite big. Sheesh. Amalei Kaser. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya says the Caesar to Rabbi Yehoshua. Now we're going to see several such incidents of the Caesar saying weird stuff to Rabbi Yehoshua and kind of backtracking from them. His daughter is going to get involved also in a little bit. Says the Caesar to Rabbi Yehoshua, your God is compared to a lion. Or described as a lion. Aryeh Shoag Milo Yira, as the pasuk says in Amos, that when a lion roars, who will not be scared? And that is a reference to the Rabbeinu Shel Olam. My Revuse, but why is it such a awesome, amazing thing to be compared to a lion? After all, Parasha Kotel Aryeh, a soldier can kill a lion. Omar Lei. So Rabbi Yehoshua responds, Lav Kehai Aryeh Misil. The Rabbeinu Shel Olam is not described as an ordinary lion. Ke'aryeh Devei Eloi Misil. Rather, when the Rabbeinu Shel Olam is described as a lion, it's like the lion of Beit Eloi. Omar lei ba'ina demechza lei niali. So the Caesar, of course, says, okay, I'd like to see this lion of Beit Eloi. Omar lei Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya says, Lo motzis chozis le, you can't. Omar le ibra chazina le, and the Caesar says, but I want to. And when the Caesar says, I want it now, so you got to give it to him now. So ba'arachme is akar miduchte. So Rabbi Yehoshua says, all right, if you insist. So Rabbi Yehoshua prayed, he davened, and the lion starts coming. And when the lion was 400 parsaos away, that's not very close, it's a little far. Niem chad kala, and from that distance of 400 parsas, this Aryeh Devei Eloi roared one roar. Apilu kol ma'abrisa, and all of the pregnant women miscarried. Vishura deromi nafal, and all of the walls in Rome fell down. And when the lion reached a distance of 300 parsos, so 100 parsos closer, Niem Kala Achrina, it roared another roar, Nesur Koche Vishine Degavre, and people's teeth fell out, Vapu Nafel Mikursaya, and the Caesar fell off of his throne, Le'ara, to the floor, Omar Le, at which point the Caesar says, all right, fine, I don't need to see this lion, B'matusa Minach, please Rabbi Yehoshua, Be'i Rachme, Ole, Dilahadr Leduchte, pray that the lion should go back to where it came from. So Rabbi Yehoshua davened, and the lion went back to where it came from. Once again, the Caesar made some kind of outlandish request to Rabbi Yehoshua that he regretted and retracted from. I want to see your God. You can't see our God. Ibra, he says, but I wanna. But Ibra chazino le, but I want to see your God. So Rabbi Yehoshua says, okay, fine. Azul okme lahade yoma betkufas tamuz. So Rabbi Yehoshua says to Caesar, come outside with me. And they went outside. It was the middle of the summer. Tkufas tamuz, like it is now. Amalei istakel bey. And Rabbi Yehoshua says to the Caesar, look at the sun. Amalei loy matzina. The Caesar says, I can't. Amalei, to which Rabbi Yehoshua says, Yoima dechad mishamoshe dekaime kame dekuchibrichu omrat lamatzina liistakolabe. If the son, which is just one of the servants that are before the Rabbanu Shalom, you can't even look at just one of them, at one of the servants that are around the Rabbanu Shalom, Shechina lo kol sheken, certainly you cannot see the divine presence itself. You can't handle it. Amalei case of Yehoshua ben Chananya, and once again, I believe this is the final incident with the Caesar. The Caesar says to Rabbi Yehoshua, "Be'ino de itzavis le naima lelekaichu." I want to make a suda for your God. Amalei lemotzis, and Rabbi Yehoshua says, you can't make a suda for our God. Amai, why can't I? Nefishe chelvase, because the Rabbi Shalom, if he's going to show up at your suda, he's going to show up with so many legions with him that you won't be able to handle such a big suda. Amalei ibra, the Caesar says, but I want to. Amalei, so Yehoshua says, all right, poke tzovis legido de revisa. Okay, go set up a big suda on the bank of the Revisa River, the Revicha Alma, because it's a big open space, and it should be able to handle the Rabbanu Shalom and all of its legions. Tarach Shisa Yarche Kaita. This is who is this Caesar that he has so much time on his hands? So he should try giving a Daf Yomi Chullin or something like that. Tarach Shisa Yarche Kaita. So he busied himself for 6 months in the summer to prepare for this banquet for the Rabbanu Shalom. Also Zika Kanche Liyama, and came a wind and blew the whole thing into the river. Tarach Shisa Yarche de Sitva. So he says, all right, Nish Geferlich, I got another 6 months. I got nothing better to do. So he prepared Nachamol for 6 months, preparing this Suda for the Rabbanu Shalom. In the winter, also Mitra Tave Biyama, but then came a winter storm and washed it all away into the sea. Amalei Maihai. So the Caesar says to Rabbi Yehoshua, he says, what's going on here? I keep on spending 6 months preparing the Suda, and it keeps on getting ruined. Amalei, so Rabbi Yehoshua says, Hane kanoshoi zalochoi the asukame. Rabbi Yehoshua says, these are just the lowly servants that are the first ones to come. The servant, right back then, the floors of a house would be made of dirt, and you'd have to sweep the dirt and then pat it down with, you like put water on it to kind of keep it flat, to keep it, pat it down and keep it from being all dusty inside. So it says Rabbi Yehoshua, those are just his lowly servants, the ones who kind of sweep the floors and keep it clean. So they were just showing up to the Suda, and that that's why initially the Suda got swept into the sea, and the second time it got washed away because those were the sweepers and the washers. To which Caesar says, if this is the case, that all of the servants are coming, and I wasn't even able to handle the first two, lo matzina, apparently it seems that I will be unable to host this Suda after a year of preparing for it. Sheesh. Omele Bas Kaser, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hanania, the daughter of the Caesar, says to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hanania, I believe this might be the same daughter, if I remember correctly. I didn't look it up. There's a Gemara in Tainus which says, what does it say? Chachma mefo'ara b'klei mechur, right? Did the daughter of the Caesar not say to Rabbi Yehoshua that there's such great wisdom, but he apparently, she was calling him ugly. Maybe this was the same daughter. The daughter of the Caesar says to Rabbi Yehoshua, your God, he is just a carpenter. I saw an explanation for that meaning he doesn't really create anything new. He just uses existing materials in order to build stuff, rather than he doesn't create new stuff. The Pasuk says, he makes his upper chambers out of water. Ema le denaiva li chada mastarisa. I want God to make me a reel. I think that's what she said. A reel is like some kind of like thing that like thread is wound around or something. Amar, it's a little bit esoteric. Amar l'chaye. So Rabbi Yehoshua says, fine. Barachme ole Allah. So Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hanania prayed. V'inga shigat saras. Osva bishuka deromi. And because she had saras, she was forced to go to the market in Rome. V'yave la mastorisa. And there she would receive a reel. De havu nihige. Because the minig was that in Rome, if anybody got sara'as, they would give them a real v'yasif b'shuka, and then the afflicted individual would sit in the market in Rome, v'sasar dolale, and would, I think, wind thread around this reel, okay, to like basically be out there in public doing this very simple activity. That people should see the afflicted individuals sitting there spinning thread on their reels, and the people observing, the observers will pray that these afflicted should be healed. Which, by the way, I believe we have a similar thing in the Holy Torah, right? The pasuk says v'tomei tomei yikra. I think the pasuk says by tsaras. And Gemaras that say that, the person is publicly, they proclaim Tamei Yikra, that they say that this person is Tamei, so that the people will see and pray that the person should be healed. Anyways, Yom Echad, Hava Kacholiv, awesome. One day, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hanania was passing through the marketplace in Rome, Havas Yazva Visosra Dolule Beshuka de Romai, and there was the daughter of the Caesar, afflicted, winding thread around this reel. Omar lo, and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Hanania says to her, Shapirta mastorisa du'avlich elehai. How is that real that my God gave you as you requested? Omar le, and she responds to Rabbi Yehoshua, not so great. Maybe you can request from the Rabbi Shalom to take back that which he gave me on my law. To which Rabbi Yehoshua says, Eloika didon me'av yoev mishkal lo shakil. When requests are made from the Rabbi Shalom, he may answer the request and grant it. He will not take it back. And you asked for this real, you received your real, you gotta keep the real. I'm reviewed says Revuda. Sure, when it comes to an ox, kreisason, its stomach is very big, very wide. Ufarsason, as well as its hooves are very big. Rav Reishe, it's got a big head. Virav Gnuvte, and a big tail. V'chilufa b'chamara, the opposite is true when it comes to a donkey. They're much smaller in size. L'may nafkamine. Why is what's the significance here? L'mekach umimka. The nafkamina is for buying and selling. Where the Gemara is saying that oxen are big, donkeys are small. If you for example, say to an ox monger, I want to buy an ox. So the expectation is it's going to be a big ox. If you say to a donkey monger, I want to mong a donkey, so the expectation is it'll be a little a smaller, more petite donkey. V'amar Rav Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda, Shor she'ikriv Adam HaRishon, the ox that Adam HaRishon offered. What ox did Adam HaRishon offer? So the Gemara in Masechta Avodah Zarah and Daf Ches, which we mamish learned a year ago. It's now, I don't know, June 29th or something, 2026. We learned this on June 26th, maybe, 2025, mamish a year ago, a year and a few days ago. So we learned a Gemara in Masechta Avodah Zarah and Daf Ches, Amud Aleph, that Adam HaRishon, after he sinned, so this happened on an Erev Shabbos, on a Friday afternoon, I believe. Where was that Gemara? This is a Gemara quoted by Tosfos from Sanhedrin, that he sinned. What was it? I believe, it was probably in the after. I believe he sinned, right? Because it says here, Tosfos quotes the Gemara that his soul went into his body in the 4th hour. The 5th hour he stood up, and then I guess the 6th hour, the 7th hour he sinned. Whatever it is, Friday, I believe afternoon, must have been afternoon. Friday afternoon. This was the last hour of the morning. Whatever it was, Friday, Adam HaRishon sinned, and then a few hours later, it started getting dark, and Adam HaRishon started getting nervous, and he was kind of freaked out. He thought that maybe because of his sin, basically the world was reverting back to Tov Avo, and he was kind of freaked out. He was fasting all night and crying all night, him and Chava, and then came the morning and the sun came out. He realized I guess this is probably normal and expected, and he brought a korban and offered it to the Rabbi Shalom the next morning to give thanks as a korban of relief. Anyways, so that ox that was offered the following morning, so Shor she'ikriv Adam HaRishon keren achasai salo, the ox that was offered by Adam HaRishon had but one horn, b'mitzcho, on its forehead. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, v'sitav la'Hashem mishar par, that'll be, the pasuk in Tehillim says that it'll be good for the Rabban Shalom, or better than mishar par. Shar par is a reference to the ox that Adam HaRishon offered. Why? Because a shor can be even a newborn cow, can even be called a shor, as the pasuk says, shor o kesef o eiz ki yivoled, that when it's born, it could already be considered a shor. And as the Mishnah says at the beginning of Masechta Para, a par is a 3-year-old cow. So how could it be that a newly born cow was also a 3-year-old cow? It's a reference to Ma'aseh Bereishis, as we're going to learn in a minute, that all of the creations were born fully grown. That when the world was created, it's not like everything was created as babies and had to grow. Rather, for example, oxen were born oxen. They were born adult, mature oxen. So v'sitav Hashem mishor por makrin mafris makrin tarte mashma. So the Gemara asks, right? Makrin, so horns, that usually implies 2 horns. An ox has 2 horns, not one. Rav Nachman mikeren ksiv. Yeah, but it's missing a yud, and it can be read mikeren, and that keren is singular. V'amar Rav Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda, shor she'ikriv Adam HaRishon, that the ox that Adam HaRishon offered to the Rabban Shalom, karnov kodmos lifarsosov, that when it was born, its horn emerged prior to its hooves. Normally, when an ox is born as a baby, so it's born with hooves, but it doesn't yet have horns. That would be difficult to probably give birth to a baby that has horns on it already. Al koponim. So the horns come later. However, by Ma'aseh Bereishis, as we said a second ago, because everything was born in its adult state, so it was born with its horns, and as it emerged from the ground, its horns emerged, or its horn emerged before its hooves did. Shenemar, v'sitav la'Hashem mishar par makrin mafris. Makrin bereisha, first the keren, v'hodar mafris, and then the hooves. Misei Levi Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, and this supports Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, which is interesting. I would think that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi would be kind of a support for Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, I think, was a little bit earlier. Anyways, then Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, Kol Ma'aseh Bereishis, that all of the creations of Bereishis b'koimason nivru, were created fully formed. B'daita nivru. Rashi says what this means is that they were that they were aware that they were going to be born. What does Rashi say? L'daitim shodiam sheyibarim sheyivroim feim neosu. That God informed them that they were going to be created, and they were okay with that. B'tzivyonam nivra'u, and they also chose their form. Says Rashi, b'dmus shebacharu lehem, in the form that they chose for themselves, they were created. Tosfos understands b'tzivyonim to be beauty, right? Like the pasuk says, tzvi letzvi ulesifaris. Shnei vaychula hashmai ba'aretz v'chol tzvam ha'tikrei tzvam ela tzivyonim. So whether it's their choice or their beauty. Darsh Rab Chanina by Puppet darshan. Yichvod Hashem la'olam, that the honor of God is forever. Yismach Hashem b'maisov, that the Rabbi Shalom rejoices in His creations, in those that He created. What did the Rabbi Shalom rejoice about regarding His creations? Pasuk zeh Sara Olam Amoro, that the officer of the world said the following verse: Bisha sha'amra HaKadosh Baruch Hu limineu ba'ilanos, that when the Rabban Shalom said limineu ba'ilanos. Let's take a look at these psukim. These are Bereshis Perek Aleph, psukim Yud Aleph and Yud Beis. I'm going to read you some psukim. Vayomer Elokim, the Rabban Shalom says, Tad she'a aretz deshe, Esif mazriya zera, that the land should be filled with all sorts of grasses and herbs and stuff. Eitz pri osa pri limineu, limino. Now, by the trees, it says with all sorts of trees, limino, each one individually. It didn't say that by the herbs and the grasses. Ashazar bo ala oretz vayichen batotze oretz deshe esev mazriya zer limineu. Now, when the Rabban Shalom said that he was going to create grasses and herbs, it didn't say limineu. It did say that by the trees, but not by the herbs. But when they were actually created in practice, it says limineu, each individual type. And then, of course, by the trees also it says limineu va'elikim kitov. Basically, when the Rabban Shalom declared his intent to create trees, he said that each tree is going to be on its own. He did not say so by the grasses. Yet, in practice, when everything was created, the grasses were on their own, limineu, each type, and the trees on their own, each type. Now, let's understand what exactly happened there. So, b'shasha amra HaKadosh Baruch Hu limineu ba'ilanos, when the Rabbi Shalom didn't say limineu for each individual type by the grasses and herbs, but he did say so by the trees, nasu dishayim kalvachomer be'atzman. The grasses and herbs made the following kalvachomer, as we're going to see in a minute, for themselves. Im ritzono shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu be'irbuvya. Look, if the Rabbi Shalom wanted all the different types and species to be all mixed together and mishkebabbled, lama amar limineu ba'ilanos, then why would the Rabban Shalom have said by trees limineu? What is it? This is a reference to kilaim, right? The pasuk says lo sizra sadcha kilaim. Don't plant your field kilaim, and we learned from there. I believe it's from that pasuk or sadcha lo sizra kilaim that not to graft trees one to another. So if you have different kinds of fruit trees, so it says limineu to their types. Apple trees should be apple trees, orange trees should be orange trees. Don't start grafting orange trees into apple trees. That would be a violation of kilaim. So when the Rabban Shalom created the trees, it says limineu, each type should be on their own. Now the Rabban Shalom didn't say that when it came to herbs, when it came to grasses and vegetables. Now, but the herbs made their own kal v'chomer. If the Rabban Shalom wanted all of the different species to be mixed together and grafted together, lama amar limineu ba'ilanos, then why by the trees did he say limineu, each individual type, if he wanted everything to be mixed and matched and concocted? Ve'od kal v'chomer. Uma ilonis she'ein darkon lotzes be'erbuvya. If, after all, when it came to trees, that trees need space. They have branches, they need space. They can't just be planted one on top of the other. So anyways, memele, they, by definition, are not one on top of the other and have their own individual space. And still, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu limineu, the Rabban Shalom still says, stay, keep your space, don't graft one on the other. Anu, we are all on top of each other. We're herbs, we grow very close together. Alachas kama v'chama, certainly we should be even more careful to make sure that we don't get grafted together and mixed together. Miyad kol echad ve'echad yatsa lemino, and that is why the pasuk, when the herbs are actually created, it says limineu, that each herb made sure to maintain their space and not to be grafted one another. Pasach Sar Olam va'Amar, and at that point the officer of the world said, Yichvod Hashem le'olam, Yismach Hashem b'maisav, may the honor of God be forever, and that God should rejoice in His creations, that the creations are so astute and so paying attention and sensitive to the nuance and realizing what the Rabbanu Shalom wants from them. But Ravina asks, Hirkiv Shnei Deshayim Zel Gav Zeh. So if somebody takes two grasses, two herbs, two vegetables, and grafts them, Rab Chanina bar Papa Mau. So according to Rab Chanina bar Papa, what's the halacha? Let's go weiter. Kevan delo kasabu limineu lo mechayv. Look, at the end of the day, the pasuk did not say limineu. The grasses and the herbs made a kavachomer on their own in order to determine for themselves that they should, on their own accord, stay away from grafting. But the Torah didn't initially say not to graft by trees. The Torah said limino. Each one needs to be individual. The Torah did not initially say that by the grasses. They made their own cheshbon and decided, and it says limineu. So therefore, on their own, when they emerged individually and didn't graft with one another. But that was their own cheshbon. So do we say that kevin de lo kasabu limineu loy mechayv? So if a person grafts different vegetables and herbs, so he would be potter, since after all the Torah didn't explicitly say don't do it. The herbs on their own decided not to do it. Odilma came to ask him ideu, since the Rabban Shalom agreed, kiman dichsibu limineu damya. So it's as though it did write it, since the Rabban Shalom was on board and was maskim. So therefore, it should be considered as though the Rabban Shalom did write it. Then you should be chayiv teku. It's a tie. We now get up to a world famous Gemara. Reb Shimon ben Pazi asks, Siv vayas Elokim es shnei amoris hagdolim. On the one hand, the pasuk in the first parak of Sefer Bereshit says that the Rabban Shalom created the two great lights. But immediately after that, in the same verse, it says, Uchsiv es hamara hagadol v'samara hakohen, the great light and the smaller light. On the one hand, we're saying two great lights, and then immediately afterwards, we're talking about one great one and one small one. Omra yareach lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The moon says before the Rabbeinu Shalom, Rabbeinu Shalom, efshel l'shnei melachim sheishtamshu b'keser echad. How could it be that two kings are going to use the same crown? How could it be that there's two great lights? Amar lo l'chiu matiyas atzmich. So the Rabbeinu Shalom says, Taka, good point. Why don't you make yourself smaller? And that way there will be one great light and one small light. Amr, the fun of Rabban Shalom, to which the moon, after having been smallened, says, wait a second. Well, I made a valid grievance. I asked a valid question. I simply said, I don't understand. How could the two great lights be working together? I mean, we're going to step on each other's toes. I asked a very valid question, and now I'm a shrunken version of myself. So on my law, so the Rabban Shalom says, "L'chi umshol bayom uvalayla." Don't worry, you can radiate not just at night but during the day as well. Amrle, my revuse. To which the moon says to the Rabban Shalom, "What's the point? The shraga b'tiyara mayahani. What good is a flame in the afternoon? A flame at night in the dark. Okay, fine, but a flame in the afternoon. What value is there in that? On my law, zil limnu bach Yisrael yom v'shanim." The Rabban Shalom says to the moon, "Okay, but by the moon we will count days and and years. So Omra le Yomanami Efshir Delo Manube Tkufosa. To which the moon says, yeah, but that's not really unique to me, because the sun also, right? The different tkufos, the different seasons are based on the sun, right? Tkufas Nisan, Tkufas Tammuz, Tkufas Tishrei, Tkufas Teves. Those are solar based. That both these two lights, the sun and the moon, will be for signs and holidays and festivals and years, etc. Zil likru tzadike bishmecho. So the Rabban Shalom says to the moon, okay, what about this? Tzadikim are going to be called with your name. Yankiv HaKohen. The pasuk says in Sefer Amos, refers to Yaakov as being, right, Jacob, the house of Jacob, as being small. Shmuel HaKohen. There's the Tana Shmuel HaKohen. David HaKohen. The pasuk says by King David, refers to King David as David HaKohen when describing the sons of Yishai. Chazei Delo Ka Meizvadaita, and the Rabban Shalom saw that no matter his efforts, the moon was still dejected. Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the Rabban Shalom says, Haviu kapara olai, bring atonement for me, shemi'atzti es hayerech, for having shrunken the moon. V'aynu do Omer Reb Shimon ben Lakish. This is what Rish Lakish says. Manishtan es soyer Rish Chodesh shenema bo LaHashem. Why dafka by the Korban Chatas of Rish Chodesh does it say LaHashem, for God, where it doesn't say that by the other Korbanis? Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because the Rabban Shalom says Seir zeh yeh kapara olai, that this Sa'ir, the Rosh Chodesh sin offering, is for me. It's a Korban Chatas for me, shemiatati es ha'erech, for having shrunken the moon. Rav Asi asks, Ksiv, on the one hand, the pasuk says, on the third day of creation, V'atotzia aretz deshe bitlas b'shabsa. On the third day of creation, the pasuk says that grasses came forth from the ground. Uchsiv, but the pasuk also says, V'chosiach hasodeh, that all of the plants, terem yeh ba'aretz, were b'may l'shabsa. And yet the pasuk also says that on Friday, right, that on the sixth day of creation, there were no plants on the ground, right? So what does the pasuk say? Because there was no rain, there was no man. So on the one hand, it says that on the third day of creation, there was already grasses, Eitz-pri, etc. And yet on the sixth day of creation, it says there was no plants and there was nobody to work the land, etc. So Melamed, it teaches, Sheyatzu Deshayim, what happened was on day 3, the plants emerged from the ground. However, the Amdu al Pesach Karka, but they just were waiting by the entrance of the ground until Adam Arishan came and davened, and the rains came, and then all of these plants that were waiting at the entrance of the land then grew. To teach that the Rabban Shalom desires the prayers of the righteous, and the Rabban Shalom was waiting for the Marishan to come and daven that these plants should come forth, at which point it rained and the plants came forth. Rav Nachman bar Papa Havyolei Hauginsa. Rav Nachman bar Papa had a garden, Shdibe Bizrane Velo Tzamach, and he planted seeds, but the seeds did not grow. Barachme, but then Rav Nachman bar Papa prayed, also Mitra Vitzamach, and rain came and the garden gardened. Omar Hainu de Rav Asi, and says Rav Nachman bar Papa, this is punct to what Rav Asi had said about Ad Marishan, that the Rabban Shalom was waiting for Ad Marishan to daven for the garden to grow. So here as well, Rav Nachman bar Papa concludes that the Rabban Shalom was waiting for him to daven that his garden should grow. Amr Rav Chanan bar Ravit ha Shisua. Interesting. So the pasuk says, I'll read you the pasuk. Achazeh lo sochlu mimayle agera umimafrise aparsa. So from these, however, you should not eat, even though they chew their cud or have split hooves. So this kind of the standard way to understand this is and from those that have split hooves, fully split hooves. However, we are darshaning the pasuk mimafrise aparsa colon. These are the animals with split hooves that you shall not eat. The first one being hashesua. The shesua is an example of an animal that has split hooves that you can not eat, or an animal, I guess probably split hooves, or chooses its coat, whatever. But the first example of one of these animals that are not kosher is the shesua. Hashesua birya b'fnei atzma, and a shesua is a unique creation. He sheyeshla shnei gabin, it's got two backs, v'shnei shedros, and two spines. V'chimoshe Rabbeinu knigiyaya o blisteriyaya. The Gemara asks, now was Moshe Rabbeinu a hunter or an archer? How did Moshe Rabbeinu know to say, by the way, there is this shesua, this very unique animal and very rare animal. It's got two backs and two spines. How did Moshe Rabbeinu know about this shesua? Mikan Shuva, this is a response. Le'omer ein Torah min hashemayim. If anybody's going to tell you that the Torah doesn't come from the Rabban Shalom, you tell them, well then how did Moshe Rabbeinu know about the shesua? Omer le Rav Chizda, Rav Tachlifa bar Avina, says Rav Chizda to Rav Tachlifa bar Avina, Zil ksov knige uvlistri be'agadtech ufarsho. Rav Chizda suggested to Rav Tachlifa bar Avina that he go and write entries in his agadatas. I guess he wrote about these. He wrote some kind of a sefer of agadatas, I guess. And Rav Chizda suggested that he write entries for knigi and blistere, that they should be interesting enough topics that people would be interested in reading about. Chamesha Sarnei Plishtim, and in that vein, we learn about the Chamesha Sarnei Plishtim. This is a pasuk in Sefer Yehoshua that it says in Perik Yud Gimel in Sefer Yehoshua that Yehoshua was getting very old towards the end of his life, and the Rabban Shalom says to him that there are still swaths of Eretz Yisrael that are unsettled and uncaptured. And it says there, Chameshes Sarnei Plishtim, that there are 5 Philistine lords. And the pasuk proceeds to list 6 Philistine lords: Ha'azati ve'ashdodi, Ha'ashkeloni agati, ve'akroni ve'avim. There seem to be 6 of these lords, even though the pasuk said it was about to list 5. So Amar Chamisha v'chashiv shisa. The pasuk says 5 lords, but then listed 6 of them. Amar Yonason, says Reb Yonason, Arunki Shelo en Chamisha. Sure, there were 6, but 5 of them were greater than the one of the 6th one was not in the same league as the other 5. So there were 5 primary ones, and there was another one that wasn't primary. Amalei Rav Chizda, Rav Tachlifa bar Avina, and says Rav Chizda to Rav Tachlifa bar Avina, Ksov Arunki ba'agad teich. Arunki would be a good entry for your agadatas, ufarsha, and then explain it. Ufliga de Rav Amram, and Ufliga de Rav. Now this explanation that the Avim were plishtim, just they weren't, the top tier of the Philistine lords. That argues with Rav to Amar Rav Avim mitemin bo, because Rav says that Avim were not actually Philistine, right? We had just said that they were Philistine, just not from the top tier of Philistines. But says Rav that the Avim were not actually Philistine. They were from Taman. Esav Harasha had a son Eliphaz. Eliphaz had a son Taman. And says Rav that the Avim came from Taman. Tanin Amiyach, we also in a brice like this, Avim mitaman ba'u, that the Avim came from Taman, from Esav Harasha's grandson. Vilama Nikra Shmon Avim. Why are they called Avim? She'ivsu es mekomim, because they destroyed their place that they came from. That they came from wherever they came from to come to Eretz Yisrael, because that's where they wanted to be, and they left wherever they came from and let it be they threw it under the bus, whatever, they destroyed it. I mean, they let it go to waste because they moved out. Davar acher neglected it. Dover acher avim she'ivu lelohus harbe. Avim, you could in this context the ayin is interchangeable with aleph, that they desired many gods. Dover acher avim shekol haroy osam ochazto ovis, that anybody who sees them got very, very scared. Rav Yosef ve'islu shitzrei dore shine lechochad b'chad. Everyone had 16 rows of teeth. I don't know what that means, but it sounds freaky. Reb Shimon ben Lakish harbe mikros sheru'uyin lisrof. Says Rish Lakish, there are many verses in the Torah. Taka, many of these verses are in the portions of the Torah that we're up to now. End of Bamidbar, like Parshas Chukas and Balak, and we're gonna have a lot of the parshas coming up they're going to be these psukim that we kind of wonder, like, why are they here? Sheru'uyin lisrof, that people think we could burn these psukim. What do we need them? What do they add for? I'll tell you, ve'einen gufei Torah, they are key. Don't burn them. Don't throw them out. Don't overlook them. These are crucial psukim. For example, the avim hayosvim b'chatzerim. The pasuk is not quoted in whole right here, so I'm gonna quote it in whole. Here's the pasuk: the avim, these avim hayosvim b'chatzerim ad azo kaftorim hayotzim mikaftor shmidam vayeshu sachtim. There's a pasuk in Dvarim. The pasuk says that the avim, they were dwelling in chatzerim until Aza, and then came the kaftorim hayovtim mikaftor shmidam. And then came the kaftorim, and they forced out the avim. So you read this pasuk, you say, I don't know what avim are, I don't know what kaftorim are. Why do I care that the avim lived here, the kaftorim came and drive? Okay, seems very detailed. Why is that important? I'll tell you why it's important, says the Gemara. Who cares that they were there and then the kaftorim drove them out? I'll tell you why it's important. Because back in Sefer Bereshis, in Parshas Vayera, there was a deal, there was a shvua between Avimelech, Melech Plishtim, and Avraham Avinu. Im tishkor li ulenini ulenechti. I assume that the point is that part of the deal, I guess, was that Avraham would not fight against, that the Yidden wouldn't fight against the Plishtim, would not drive them off of their land. So now there was this shvua between Avraham Avinu and the Plishtim. So Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so the Rebbeinu Shalom says, so the assumption here is that the Avim are the Plishtim, right? It's like the first shot that we had, that the Avim were part of the part of the Plishtim. They weren't kind of in the top tier, but they were part of the Plishtim. So we have a problem here. On the one hand, the Yidden are coming to Eretz Yisrael to inhabit Eretz Yisrael. On the other hand, you have these Avim there, and the Avim are from Plishtim, and there was a treaty, there was a deal between the Yidden and Avimelech, Melech Plishtim. So Leisu Kaftorim, so Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Leisu Kaftorim, let the Kaftorim come, Leifku Me'avim, and let the Kaftorim take force the Avim out, drive the Avim out, the Anu Plishtim, that they are the Plishtim, and now once the Plishtim are gone, V'leisu Yisrael Leifku Me'Kaftorim, and let the Yidden now come and avoid a direct conflict with the Plishtim, which would be an issue because there were agreements with the Plishtim, but let the Kaftorim come and drive out the Plishtim, and now the Yidden aren't taking land from the Plishtim, they're taking land from the Kaftorim. So you have this verse that seems extremely random and technical, and like, why do I care? At the same time, it's super important because you don't realize this, but it actually relates way back to Parshas Vayera and Sefer Bereshis, between referring to the shvua that Avraham Avinu made with Avimelech, Melech Plishtim. And similarly, Ki Cheshbin ir Sichon, that Cheshbin is the city of Sichon, Melech HaAmori, he, V'hu nilcham b'melech Moav v'gomer. The pasuk tells us that Sichon captured Cheshbin from Moav. Why is it important for us to know that Sichon captured Cheshbin from Moav? Who cares? Why is that important to us? My nafkamine, the Amalu HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'll tell you why. Because the Rebbeinu Shalom says li Yisrael, to the Yidden, al totzer es Moav. Don't fight against Moav. And if you're going to be unable to fight against Moav, then how are you going to be able to capture Cheshbin? So Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, Leisi Sichon lepik mimayav. Let Sichon come and take cheshbon from Moav. V'leisu Yisrael v'leifku misichon. And again, the Yidden then would not have to take cheshbon from Moav. They'll take it from Sichon instead. V'ainu d'Amar Papa is what Papa says. Amun u'Moav tiaru b'Sichon. That Ammon and Moav were purified, were kind of laundered, so to speak, via Sichon. That Sichon took the lands of Ammon and Moav, which enabled the Yidden to take it from Sichon. Tzidonim yikaru lechermon Sirion. That the Tzidonim called Chermon Sirion. I'm going to read, the pasuk then continues. The Amori yikru lo Snir, and the Amoris called it Snir. Tana, we learn about Snir v'Sirion, that both of these names, the Tzidoni name and the Amori names, Snir, Sirion, Mehari Eretz Yisrael, were actually mountains in Eretz Yisrael. All of these nations of the world, Krach Gadol, went and built a great metropolis le'atzmo for themselves, ve'elelo al shem Hari Eretz Yisrael, and named these metropolises based on names of the mountains of Eretz Yisrael. Lamedcha, to teach you, shafilu Hari Eretz Yisrael chavivin ala umas olam, that the mountains of Israel are beloved among the nations of the world. Kayotze bo, and similarly vesa'om me'evir also la'arim, and similarly with regard to why do I care about these psukim? The pasuk says in Parshas Vayigash that Yosef HaTzadik went and moved around the Egyptians from this city to that city. It seems pretty technical. Tell me about the story of the famine and the 7 years and the cows and the dreams and the Yidden come to Eretz Yisrael. Why do I have to know that Yosef HaTzadik, in terms of how he managed Egypt, he had this city go to that city and that city go to this city? It's important because the Yidden came to Mitzrayim from Eretz Yisrael. And the Egyptians could look at the Yidden who came to Eretz Yisrael as strangers, as people who came from a different place and came here from somewhere else. But by moving everybody around, all Egyptians didn't really come from the place that they were. Everybody came from somewhere else. So in that sense, the Yidden were not outliers in that respect. Chevre, that was Daf Samich, Daf 60 of Masechta Chullin. Daf Samich of Masechta Chullin was a journey. We began talking about the keresh. The keresh was a animal with one horn that we said is a chaya, but from there we said that the keresh came from the Be'iloi, and so did this lion. And the lion, that's the lion of Be'iloi, is the lion that the Rabbi Shalom is referred to as, like in the pasuk of Ari Yishog Milo Ari Shog Mi Lo Yira. Ari Yishog Mi Lo Yira, which then led to all these agaritas about the Caesar and Yehoshua ben Chananya, and we talked about the Shor Par, the ox that Adam Rishon offered after, right, when he kind of survived the first night, and then that led to discussions about Ma'aseh Bereishis and the Ma'aris, Hashnei Ma'aris Agedolim, to the famous story of the Yareach, the moon, asking the Rabbi Shalom how you could have two great lights serving together, at which point the moon was shrunk, and the Rabbi Shalom tried to cheer up the moon unsuccessfully, which led to, of course, Haviu Olai Kapara Al Shemiatati Esayareach. So all sorts of very interesting and famous Gemaras on Daf Samich of Masechta Chullin. And at the end of the Gemara, we talked about a very interesting topic, which is all of these seemingly random psukim that we have in the Chumash that we kind of wonder, why are these interesting? Why are they important? And we gave a few samples, a few examples of why they are actually really important and do need to be there in order for kind of everything in the. These are actually the psukim that kind of pull together a lot of the details of the Chumash. Friends, that was Daf Samich, Daf 60 of Masechta Chullin. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you enjoy your day. I will catch you to Maho.